Have you ever imagined how far you would go to secure your child's future? Clara, a single mother, accepts a mysterious contract to dance for an Arab prince without knowing that it would change her life forever. What seemed like a simple job turns into a dangerous game of secrets, pride, and a forbidden love that defies all rules. But will she be able to escape the palace intrigues? Or will she be consumed by them? Stay until the end to discover this story full of twists and emotions. You dance, right? Clara frowned. After an exhausting day, I just wanted to rest, but now I was there, holding the phone, trying to understand the strange proposal I had just heard. It depends, she replied suspiciously. If it's a philosophical question, then yes, we all dance on the stage of life. If it's professionally, the answer involves money. The voice on the other end of the line didn't hesitate. Good, because there's a prince in need of entertainment, and he pays very well. She raised an eyebrow. Entertainment? That word can mean a lot of things, some pretty suspicious. It's nothing like you think, the man assured. It's a legitimate contract. You dance, he watches, and you make enough money to change your life. Clara bit her lip thoughtfully. The promise of a high payment was tempting. After months of struggling to pay the rent and support her daughter, this might be the only real chance she would have. I'm listening. Days later, Clara was in front of an impressive palace, which looked like something out of a movie. Golden gates glittered in the scorching sun, and marble columns supported luxurious balconies. But unlike fairy tales, she knew that real princes weren't exactly charming. A man in impeccable clothes guided her to a large hall. In the center, sitting with a rigid posture, was Adam. He was tall, had sharp eyes, and an expression that seemed carved from stone. I hope you're better on stage than you are at reading contracts, he said bluntly. Clara raised an eyebrow. And I hope you're a better human being than you seem in your distant prince biography. A subtle gleam passed through his gaze, maybe surprise, maybe irritation. Did you read the contract? Lee. She crossed her arms. And honestly, it looks more like a manual on how to care for a robot than an employment agreement. I prefer robots, Adam said. They don't argue. Then it's a shame you hired a dancer and not a machine. He sighed impatiently. Let's get to work. Your presentation must be impeccable. Music filled the hall. Clara closed her eyes for a second before starting. His movements were fluid, each step measured with precision. The veils she wore moved like waves in the air. She felt Adam's gaze on her, attentive, analytical, but distant, as if he saw something beyond the dance. This bothered her. When the music stopped, the silence lengthened. Then Adam leaned forward slightly. You have talent. Thank you, Clara replied. Although I have a feeling I'm not the first to hear that. It's not, he said coldly. But talent isn't enough. You have to follow the rules. Rules like no interaction with boss except when asked? She asked, rolling her eyes. Exactly. She laughed ironically. And I thought I was going to live my fairy tale. This isn't a fairy tale, Adam said, standing up. It's a contract. After the presentation, an assistant gave Clara a copy of the terms. She reread it carefully. She would live in a separate wing of the palace. I would have no contact with Adam outside of performances. He would never touch her. It would be simple as long as you followed the rules. But Clara had an uncomfortable feeling. Clara placed her hands on her hips and looked at the breakfast table in front of her. An absurd variety of fruits, breads, cheeses, and sweets were laid out on the spotless linen tablecloth. How many people are you expecting? An army? Nadia, the palace housekeeper, looked at her with disdain. The food is served like this every day. Mr. Adam likes options. Clara took a piece of bread and spread honey on it. Good to know. But if he doesn't eat it all, can I take some back to my room? Nadia raised her eyebrows. This is a palace, not an all-you-can-eat buffet. Clara smiled. What a waste of food. If one day this prince gets tired of his wealth, he might open a restaurant. Before Nadia could respond, Adam entered the room. He wore a light robe and walked with his usual impeccable posture. I see you're already too comfortable, he commented, noticing Clara enjoying the bread as if it were in her own home. I adapt quickly, she said, chewing slowly. Nadia, on the other hand, remained tense, probably expecting Adam to reprimand Clara, but he just helped himself to coffee without paying much attention. I hope you're preparing for tonight's performance. Clara finished chewing and smiled. If my presence here already bothers you, imagine when I start dancing for real. Adam didn't respond, just took a sip of his coffee. Clara noticed that man seemed to carry an invisible weight on his shoulders, and no matter how much he tried to remain distant, something about him aroused her curiosity. Hours later, ready for her second performance, Clara passed through the palace's huge corridor. He stopped when he saw a large painting on the wall, a detailed painting of a woman wearing a typical Arab costume, her eyes expressive and her smile soft. Beautiful, isn't it? Clara turned around and saw Adam standing behind her. Is that your wife? He looked away for a moment before nodding. It was. Clara felt she had touched on a sensitive subject, but to her surprise, Adam didn't seem angry, just distant. She also danced? He asked. No, he replied, but I liked watching. Clara smiled. Then I'm already at a disadvantage. Adam finally looked at her. Why? Because apparently I'll never get over the original. He remained silent for a moment and then took a step back. The performance starts in 10 minutes. When he left, Clara let out a sigh. Difficult, Prince. That night, Clara danced again. She felt Adam's eyes on her, but this time there was something different. It was less distant, more attentive, as if he were, for the first time, truly present. As Clara moved, she noticed something curious. Adam not only watched, but seemed to be fighting an internal battle. His gaze alternated between interest and resistance, as if he was fighting something he didn't want to feel. When the performance ended, the silence in the hall was broken only by the sound of the wind coming in through the high windows. You dance with intensity, Adam said finally. Well, you watch it intensely, Clara countered. I watch everything carefully. That sounds tiring. Sometimes it is. Then you should try dancing. The idea seemed absurd to him. I would never dance. Fear? Clara raised an eyebrow. Adam held her gaze, and for a moment he seemed ready to respond. But, as usual, he just turned and left the room without saying anything. While Clara was trying to decipher the prince, there was someone who didn't like her presence at all. Nadia. The housekeeper watched everything from afar and pursed her lips tightly. This won't last, she muttered to herself. Clara adjusted herself in the armchair in the palace library, leafing through a thick book with a golden cover. Since arriving there, he had tried to get used to that reality. His contract was clear. Dance, get paid, and follow the rules. However, something about that place seemed increasingly complicated. Adam wasn't just an arrogant prince. He was an enigma. The night before, when he watched his performance, his gaze didn't just seem distant. For the first time, there was something different about him. Interest, perhaps, or an internal conflict he refused to admit. But any thoughts of that were interrupted when Nadia entered the room with her usual impassive expression. Mr. Adam asked you to take care of a small decoration in his room. Clara lifted her head from the book, suspicious. Decor? Like pick out curtains? Nadia smiled, but her smile was cold. Something more meaningful, small details, something more welcoming. Clara narrowed her eyes. And he really asked for this? Of course, Nadia replied too quickly. He has difficulty dealing with certain environments. Maybe a more personal touch will help. Clara hesitated. The idea that Adam wanted something cozier seemed unlikely, but on the other hand, maybe it was the chance to break that ice between them. After a while of choosing the right items, Clara finally finished. Adam's room was different. She chose soft tones, added pillows, a new rug, and even a delicate painting depicting a father and son walking together through the desert. It seemed fitting for a prince who clearly had a dark past. She took a step back, analyzing the result. Good. Now it doesn't look like a mausoleum anymore. When Adam entered the room, his expression immediately hardened. His gaze swept over every detail and then stopped at the painting. A heavy silence settled in. Who did this? Clara, who was finishing adjusting a curtain, turned around in surprise at his tone. Me! Don't like it? Adam took a step forward, anger evident on his face. Who gave you permission to touch my things? Clara blinked, confused. Nadia said you asked. Nadia! He let out a humorless laugh. And you believed her? Why wouldn't I believe it? Adam clenched his fists. Because this room is not a place for games. Kidding? I just tried to help. Clara crossed her arms, facing him without fear. You seem like someone carrying a lot of weight, and I thought a little humanity here wouldn't hurt. You don't know anything about me. Then explain to me. For a moment, it looked like Adam was going to speak, but he just walked past her, ripped the painting off the wall and threw it on the bed. I want you to remove all of that now. Clara felt a knot in her stomach. Is it so difficult for you to accept a gesture of kindness? Adam turned to face her, his eyes filled with conflicting emotions. I don't need your kindness. Clara gritted her teeth. Good, because honestly, I'm starting to realize you don't deserve it. She left the room, slamming the door behind her. Hours later, Adam was still there, looking at the painting on the bed. He wanted to ignore it, pretend that none of it bothered him. But the truth was that it moved, and he hated to admit it. Meanwhile, on the other side of the palace, Nadia watched the scene from afar, satisfied. That was easier than I thought, he muttered. But what she didn't know was that it wouldn't take long for Adam to discover the truth, and when that happened, the consequences would be inevitable. Clara was sitting on the bed, staring at the ceiling of her room in the palace. What the hell had happened? One moment she would try to break down Adam's emotional wall, and the next he would treat her as if she were an invader. What kind of man can't stand pillows and a pretty picture? She muttered to herself. But the truth was that it wasn't just about the decoration. Something deeper had affected him, something that Clara still didn't understand. They knocked on the door. Come in, she said without much desire. To his surprise, it was Adam. He didn't seem as cold as before, but his expression was serious. We need to talk, she crossed her arms. If you have to say goodbye, save your time. I'm already mentally packing my things. He ignored the comment and sat down in the nearby armchair. I was tricked. Clara blinked. Excuse me? Nadia set you up. I found out she lied about ordering the decorations. Clara gave a dry laugh. Ah, so now you believe me? Yes, she sighed, rubbing her face. Great. But what now? Are you going to apologize, or would you rather pretend like nothing happened? I'm going to send her away, Adam said, ignoring her sarcasm. Clara's eyes widened. Wow! Now that's unexpected. She tried to manipulate the situation to push you away. Clara didn't know whether to be pleased or even more irritated. Well, it worked. You almost got what you wanted. Adam was silent for a moment. Then he lowered his head and took a deep breath. I didn't want that. The confession took her by surprise. Clara narrowed her eyes. What did you want then? Adam hesitated. For the first time, he seemed lost. I don't know, he admitted. The silence between them was heavy, but not uncomfortable. Clara realized that behind all that rigid facade, there was a broken man trying to maintain control over something that was already slipping out of his hands. You need to stop fighting everything all the time, she said softly. Adam looked up at her, and Clara saw something different there. It wasn't anger nor coldness, it was fear. It's hard to trust. Clara moved a little closer. Then trust me. He didn't respond, but he didn't look away. The next morning, Nadia was thrown out of the palace. Adam didn't explain to anyone, and Clara didn't ask. I knew that chapter was closed, but something new was beginning. That night, when Clara introduced herself to Adam, his gaze on her was different. There was no longer that resistance, that invisible barrier. He was there, present, and when the song ended, he did something unexpected. Clara, she stopped, surprised. Yes? Adam stood up and walked over to her. I want you to stay. She blinked, confused. I'm hired to stay. Not by contract, he corrected. By choice. Clara felt her heart accelerate. Are you saying... I'm saying I don't want this to end when the contract ends. She was speechless for a moment. That sounds like a fairy tale ending, he joked. Maybe that's a start. And for the first time, Adam smiled.